So, hello. Hope everyone's feeling strong and healthy and safe
Peachy.
and calm, dealing with all the stress right now and confusion and chaos. But what's new, really?
And even if you're not, maybe this can provide some distraction.
Yeah, it helps us. We're kind of in a tunnel today of the world of Stockhausen. So,
And what a vast, lengthy, amphetamine-infused world it was.
why do you say that?
And it just seems like he had to have been.
Oh, because he worked so hard and so much.
Amphetamine.
I did say he described his schedule as, and this is later in life, so I don't know if this is always how it was, because I know he was traveling quite a bit in his younger years. But at one point he said his schedule was from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. He would work on music. And then from
He was older,
3,
I think, when he said that.
yes, but this probably was just his schedule always, because he described, most of his life this way. From 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. he would work on music, and then from 8 to 10 p.m. he would work on music. So 3 and 4 is 7, 8, that's 9 hours a day working on music. And, not too much detail there in what he's actually doing. But at one point he did say when he was really only working in his electronic music studio, he would spend most of the day, working on the music. And then at night he would work on the pre-composition. So basically sketching out what he was going to work on the next day. Because that's a lot of, it's a little more technical. It's not really just composition and having, people come in and play the parts. He's having to, do the setup of what is even going to be recorded and then
One of the common
manipulated.
themes I've noticed with early electronic music specifically is that people tend to have a blueprint for what they want to design.
Yes.
Because it was such a painstaking process back then, when you're dealing with tape machines and, more primitive sound sources. I think you really had to kind of map out an idea of the sound you wanted to create, for your next session in order to be productive.
If you were going to be productive, yeah, especially if you were working on something that was commissioned or something that had a deadline in terms of like you were going to do a performance somewhere of this piece. You definitely had to be very strict. He had the benefit of working out of the West German radio electronic music studio. It was the West German radio that he worked at, but then they built an electronic music studio. And he was the head of that. He was the director of the West German radio or electronic music studio within the radio station.
In Cologne?
In Cologne, similar to the BBC and also the Paris studios of Pierre Schaeffer. Very, very similar to Pierre Schaeffer. He even said that he went to Paris for a while and he spent some time there in the Music Kontakte studio. And when he came back to Germany, he decided he was not going to make anything electroacoustically. He was only going to make synthesized sound.
Was he at GRM?
Yes. So he spent time there. He learned their techniques. He learned, what was going on. I think he pretty much went everywhere in the world that there was an electronic music studio. And he decided he was only going to make music from sound that he synthesized. So that was from tone generators, from his test equipment, from things he built, from taking, things he built, recording those sounds and manipulating them. So not necessarily...
This was an era that he went through, right?
No, he says that's pretty much it, from that point on. This is from, I want to say 1953.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
What are the, for instance, in his piece, Contact, what sounds like
That's
a piano?
probably... so there's a couple versions of Contact in the little research that I've done. We're not experts. We're just here to have a conversation about Stockhausen because, you can get pretty academic about things. You can look at him from just the standpoint of being a composer and analyzing his compositions, or you can look at it from, his experimental side and his innovations. There's a lot of points of entry here. But Contact has multiple versions. There's a version that is just the electronic sounds. There's a version that's the electronic sounds and composition. And then there's a third version, and I'll have to look it up, but it has something else going on as well. So we learned, did a premiere of Contact. This is probably his most famous work. He did that from 1958 to 1960. He created that. And then he toured it. He premiered it in San Francisco.
He lived there, though, right?
Yeah, he was living in San Francisco. And I don't know exactly, the time period, how long he was
Sausalito, I believe.
Yeah, he was there in 1967 to premiere Contact in San Francisco.
Which is north, like North Bay, north of the
a very
city.
beautiful place to be. That would be well after BB and Louis Barron were living there. But, San Francisco in 1967, I could only imagine what he was getting into and the kinds of people he was interacting with, if at all. So that's a pretty interesting
I wonder if
crossroads.
he met George Harrison there or something like.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely spent a lot of time in London too. So that's where he got connected with the Beatles. I mean, he did lectures. They were connected to him. I don't know that he really gave a hoot about them very much. But he did say that he went and visited the EMS studios. So he met Peter Zinoviev, and Peter Zinoviev sold him a system. So he brought an EMS 100 series
He had a 100 series.
To the studio, because one of his duties, he said, as the director of the West German radio station, or West German radio electronic music studio, was to decide what equipment they would use, and then kind of working with all the engineers on what the equipment did and how to use it.
So he was like the equipment buyer.
So he brought in the EMS system.
Okay. Analog Solutions out of the UK is actually reissuing something inspired by the System 100 Delaware, system. It's not exact, but we'll chalk a link up there.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's like a huge, like desk system, just as big, as you would expect from something like that, but it's but it's modern.
The 100 system is massive, right?
Yeah, it's the big one that you see in a lot of the radiophonic workshop videos. It was called the Delaware.
So
and it was capable of doing quite complex electronic compositional stuff, like big sequencer, I think a couple sequencers.
So I'm going to start throwing some links in.
Several oscillators.
Check in on
tons
that.
of modulation. Just a really massive beast. I think it was kind of like EMS's way of being like, all right, this is all you could possibly ever need.
Yeah, and they were really at the forefront of getting the synthesizers into the radios and electronic music studios that were around Europe.
Europe, I was going to say it was the key word is Europe. They were key in Europe in terms of.
I'm trying to find a good resource on the 100, so people can see it. So I'm looking for that right now.
Yeah, that should be pretty easy to find.
So
System 100
being fully restored. I'm going to click on this link. So
Massive.
I'm just trying to grab a link about the EMS 100 system that Stockhausen brought to the West German Electronic Music Studio. Here's a good one. This is just about one that's being restored. But again, these were, just at the big radio stations that had the electronic music studios in the 60s, as well as universities. So same kind of theme here. So I'd say, what we've learned so far about Stockhausen really runs in parallel with what we learned about Pierre Schaeffer in the Paris Electronic Music Studio. And, something that he even said in an interview that I was watching is that he is simply a product of his time. He wouldn't be who he was, inventing what he was doing, making the music he was doing, if he hadn't been born in the exact place and time that he was. And he's simply a product of it.
At least he admits it.
Yeah, and it's something we've actually talked about a lot. Obviously, this club is about early electronic music in, the 50s to the 70s. So if you were making music in the 50s to 70s with electronic music and you were on the cutting edge of this, using magnetic tape and doing music concrete and things like that, you had to be born at a certain time. So it was interesting to hear him say that, because we've said that so much with all the people that we've covered, that's just what it is, If you're born now, you're not going to be on the cutting edge of early electronic music. Or if you were born in Beethoven's time, you're going to be, innovating in that realm. But there is definitely a through line with anyone who was innovating in an avant-garde way with music. Kind of had a similar philosophy about, kind of breaking the norms of the time. And Stockhausen was definitely in that worldview. Mm-hmm. I've been really absorbing a lot of information, so I'm sorry if I'm babbling a lot, because I just soaked it all in, and now I'm ready to release it all on you.
Spewing it, if you will. Yeah, and one of the things that really caught my eye about his experience is that he was involved with the Expo 70, called the Space Music Expo 70. So it's very much in line with this group. It took place in Germany. What city was it? Do you know?
I don't have that one memorized. The World's Fair, right? Is what they call it.
Yeah, it was in West Germany.
Or is that something different than the World's Fair?
West Germany, it says.
World's Fair in Osaka. Okay, so he went to Japan. He went everywhere. He really got...
it was the German Pavilion.
Okay, gotcha.
At the Space Music Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. So that was confusing. Sorry for the...
So he went there to perform something similar to Pierre Schaeffer. He performed at one of those expos, and everybody was really mad. The audiences were not happy.
They were well. I feel like
there's not an audience for this at its time when it's being
experimental
developed.
Music. Yeah, it's interesting because I was listening to a Suzanne Ciani interview today, and she was talking about how one of the things she's trying to do is exemplify how electronic music was done back then. In the 70s, her era.
I'm curious what that means to her.
Well, in terms of the interface and, getting, she said she used to have a big 50 something panel system, a really big system. And, there was something to the fact that she was able to, interface, directly with the instrument in a very human, sort of way, and that, now with the advent of the computer, it's become, so simple, and, people have she sees a lot of folks just hit play on the space bar.
Oof.
And
so how we all feel about that.
Very adamant about exploring, the human element as it applies to electronic music. And I think that's one of the things that I found interesting about Stockhausen is he was kind of quite the opposite, right? You said he spent a lot of time in the compositional stage.
Get the pre-compositional stage.
Right.
So he did everything very mathematically. He created languages. So he studied linguistics and things like this. And he was originally going to be a novelist. He wanted to be a writer. Apparently, he wrote a letter to a famous novelist at the time in the 50s. Early 50s, maybe even late 40s, when he was trying to figure out what he should do with his life. And this author actually wrote him back. I'll have to look up who exactly that is, and said, you should do what is exactly uniquely you. Only pursue exactly what is unique about you. Don't do anything that anybody else has done before. So I think that kind of fuels him for the rest of his life to be so focused on being in his own head, in his own ideas, and just pursuing them to the fullest extent and not letting anything get in his way.
It makes a lot of sense.
And not really caring what anyone thought about it.
Nothing else really matters.
Kind of wish someone had said that to me when I was 18.
Yeah. Well, you know it now.
I know it now. It's never too late to learn.
Knowing is half the battle.
To follow your heart.
But yeah.
But he was also not to we try not to be too linear biographical because we can all read Wikipedia, but I got really excited learning about how cosmic Stockhausen was, how much he referred to things as being cosmic.
Oh, about how he was educated on the star Sirius.
I think it's a planet. He called it a planet, Sirius.
It was a star.
I thought it was a star, but I heard him say planet too. But anyway.
Planet,
Sirius.
Star.
One of his compositions, one of the works he did was called Sirius as well. But he was basically saying that he's not from this world, and that cosmic forces are really important, and that music is like a cosmic tone that we're like interpreting and experiencing. And one of his last works,
I agree with a lot of that, though.
I mean, we call this the Cosmic Tape Music Club for a reason.
It's just vibration.
Yeah, one of his
It's up
last
to our ears
compositions
to how we perceive it.
was called Cosmic Pulses. So
In
I'm
our
going to grab.
brains, I guess.
There's a little.
Ultimately.
There's an entire Wikipedia page just about cosmic pulses. His work from 2007. So because like I said, he's did over 300 compositions and
A lot of work.
Traveled
That's
the
what I meant
world.
by amphetamine.
And there's so much to dive into, but if we just focus on the cosmic stuff, we could probably do a whole hour on just that. So he was a weirdo.
I feel
and
like
I really
him
like that about him.
and Sun Ra came from the same planet.
He did an opera that's 5 hours long that looks very much like a Sun Ra production.
Right,
And
right.
I was not expecting that. When I started doing the research for this conversation about Stockhausen, I was expecting to read a lot of really dry stuff about his mathematical approach to composition.
Serialism.
And, serialism and pointillism and how his notation systems that he developed. But I did not expect to find a cosmic opera in the mix. So that was really, really awesome.
Yeah, I didn't realize how
That made me really happy.
space happy he was.
I guess, again, there's a reason why
Cosmic era.
we said, this group is
Space
really
age
about
era.
the electronic music and the space age and how much those things are inextricable. You cannot separate the people from the time.
I get what
from
you're
the
saying
technology.
about the time frame playing such a
Can't.
huge
It was so important
role.
at the time. It was all anybody was talking about. It informed everyone, I think, at a very subconscious level, even in every art form.
Yeah, and
So we can get technical or we can get cosmic. We
And
lean to the cosmic.
It's interesting to me that once the space race in that space age era happened, you can't take that back. There may be another generation that happens. I don't know if we'll ever, get into, commercial, inhabiting of
Oh yeah, I don't think we'll live long enough to see people living
other
on Mars.
planets and
Yeah.
things like that. So yeah, there's this chance that maybe there'll be another space age, in that regard. But there's never going.
We'll never stop being in a space obsessed society.
There will never be another time when that was all anyone was really thinking about. Kind of this pandemic right now, and
That has really informed. We'll never not be the.
this is an era.
The people who
we're
live
in
through this.
we're
Yeah.
in an interesting era right now. But there was a time when the space race and the space age, that was the definitive aspect of the era.
I guess we're the internet age,
yeah.
right?
Well, right, and
We're obsessed. We're literally live streaming, talking to people about the space age right now.
communicating through.
This is one definitely Stockhausen. We've been sitting on him for a while because there's so much to
It's
cover.
a big one, and honestly,
It's overwhelming.
we still didn't feel ready on because it's so vast with him. He just he got really. I think even one of most of the articles about him mentioned that he became extremely prolific, very fast in that sphere.
Yeah,
he
was
quickly
obsessed
became
with leaving his mark,
known
making
as
his work.
one of the pioneering
He rose above the noise of everybody
composers
else that was doing
of the
this.
time.
He became a myth, even you could say. He talks about this idea
within his own lifetime.
that we keep people alive. He references Beethoven a lot. We keep the myth of Beethoven alive by continuing to play his music and talk about him and share, in the collective consciousness what he was. When he really only lived for a very brief time, a long time ago, and made only a very specific kind of music, but he's this myth now. And so I think Stockhausen saw himself in a similar way. Yes, okay.
Are you talking about
let me read that whole
spatialization?
comment. Yeah, this comment is not coming up all the way on our screen, so I'm going to look at it in the group here. So seem to recall Stockhausen was also a pioneer about concepts in the distribution of the sources of sound in the performing of his work, quadraphonic sound and later octaphonic sound.
Right.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. Your translations are right. He built these systems. I'm going to get this wrong. Queg, quadraphonic. What does the E and the G stand for? And the octaphonic systems. You are correct. He was very, very interested in not just sound, but sound in
Placement.
space.
Yes.
Sound in space.
Sound within
Not the kind
the
of
environment.
space we were just talking about, but environmental space.
Which I would say, I would rate that high in terms of, that being,
That's probably one of his main contributions.
one of his main contributions, but I would say that is one of the hottest topics in audio
Right now?
right now. Yeah, like for instance, like ambisonic technologies. I was recently at like a career expo for audio professionals when I was in New York last year, and one of the I would say most prolific topics that was being discussed at this thing was the idea of sound as it relates to virtual reality. Ambisonic
because
sound.
there's so much like gaming and virtual reality stuff going on.
Right.
That the sound that you experience with that is going to have to be developed as well.
I was talking to a fellow earlier today about how that's something that I'm actually researching for our project. Like something that I think I would like to see us embrace is, the idea of capturing sound using multiple speakers and creating sort of this like immersive audio experience. Now that a lot of the devices support, that natively, for instance, like, pretty much any level of iPhone, I think now has virtual reality capabilities built in. Surround systems are a lot more popular, especially with people that, that have pretty intense video gaming rigs, are now set up for virtual reality. I still remember like the late 80s, early 90s version that, came out initially that was like the movie Lawnmower Man.
Oh man, you've lost me.
You never saw that?
No.
It might have been a little bit before your time.
There was virtual reality experiences happening in the late 80s.
Yeah.
What?
That was when I first found out about it, and it was like all really basic. I don't know if anybody else remembers that, but it was.
You're really out on your own on this one. We really got to pull this one out of the archives.
Well, it was just really basic. That was all I was going to say.
Okay.
It was super basic, and it was
What did
very short-lived. It was like one of these things where, like, I remember, like, all of a sudden on the news there was like a puff piece about like virtual reality, and it had like somebody in the goggles.
Oh, so you
would
would wear something.
And it was all like super, 90s looking, I guess, at the time. It was like basically like the virtual reality version of the Power Glove.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It was basically like playing virtual reality Duck Hunt, and
there it is. I found the Quag.
They were sort of, alluding to the idea that it was going to be, the next big technology. And now I feel like that is true. It is kind of like one of the most interesting.
It is the focus right now. We've been working on it for decades. You're right.
New focuses in entertainment,
Yeah.
and especially in times like now where everybody's spending a lot more time at home. I think I could see it exploding. At this point.
I'm sharing some links here. Kontakte in full on YouTube, which is one of his most famous works. Like we said, there's 3 different versions. Sorry to bring us back to Stockhausen here. Sorry.
You mean spatialization
and
immersive sound? We were already talking about that.
Yeah, so the first version of Kontakte was just for electronic sounds. The second was electronic, piano, and percussion. And the third had theatrical work as well. So I'm putting that in there. I'm just doing a little housekeeping, throwing some links in. But what I found about his spatialization stuff is that the octaphony, which is one of his works from 1991, he worked on this opera for 30 years, I want to say.
Wow, that's a long time to focus your energy on one piece.
He worked on this thing for 30 years, but Octopony is one of the components of Act 2 from his opera, and it is, all about the spatialization. So I found out the Wikipedia just for that. Again, there is so much information on Stockhausen, which is a blessing and a curse because it's a lot to go through.
It's a lot to sift through.
What to talk about, but it also is a blessing because it's so much for us to discuss, which I actually also heard him say in an interview that he was like, I did enough work. You guys can spend the rest of eternity like analyzing it. I did it all. I'm not going to analyze it right now.
He's very confident.
You guys talk about it. You talk about me, keep my myth alive, analyze what I did. There's enough there to keep you busy for a lifetime, which is true.
We are.
So to build off of what Jose was saying, the queg was something that he developed, which was a quadraphonic effect generator, a device manufactured by EMS in the early 1970s.
Oh, really?
It was developed by Stockhausen in collaboration with Zinoviev, and despite having only 4 outputs, the queg could still be used to produce an octaphonic output by manually switching to 4 outputs, not only between the square on the floor and the one on the ceiling, but between all 6 squares forming the sides of the cube. And then they used a bunch of synthesizers and stuff. There's a whole list of the gear, which if you're into the gear, this is pretty cool. I know it's just Wikipedia, but it's like in depth on this one piece of music that he made. So I'll put that.
Very cool. I love it when you nerd out on gear.
I love it too. I think it's cool that, like we said, there's so many sides to Stockhausen. You can talk about him as the man, the myth, the legend, the superstar who was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. We can talk about
He was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. Let's just take a second.
Who knew that? I didn't know that actually.
I didn't either.
Like I knew the Beatles were into him and everything, but I didn't know his face was one of the faces on there.
Crossover, but I did not know that he was literally. I mean, that's going to send you into another oblivion.
Yeah, if you start looking into that.
In terms of I'm talking as like his in terms of his
ego. Yeah.
Yeah, like he was on that cover. You can't ever take that away from him. You know, like he was on, one of the best-selling records of all time. He was on the cover.
And one of the most groundbreaking.
And one of the most
He's like the father of bringing experimental composition into the mainstream, into pop music.
Right.
And
no
so
one
many
could
people
deny him
reference
that based off of the fact that his head was, featured on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
Which I don't think he sort of knew about these things, but he didn't really care. He thought they were too repetitive and nobody was doing anything interesting, and he would send them back letters that were like, you should listen to these pieces of mine and get a little more interesting.
Right. Yeah. He was trying to tell George Martin how to do his job, I'm sure.
But more recently, Bjork also talks about how he was a big influence for her because she studied music at a very young age, and she got really bored. Can you imagine Bjork being bored by listening to Bach and Beethoven and begging her teachers to give her something more interesting? And so they gave her Stockhausen. And she ended up doing an interview with him. What year is this? I'm not sure exactly what year this is, but I found a transcript of the interview that Bjork did with Stockhausen. I didn't find any audio, just this. It's not very long either. It's very easy to read.
You don't know what year it's from?
I don't know what year it's from. It doesn't say.
It's all good, but that's really cool. I didn't realize you found that. But
it's so cool. Yeah, I found this.
I'm going to have to read that.
So I'll be posting. So what I like to do is put all the links here in the conversation as we're talking about it. But later throughout the week, we're going to be posting, I might do a big post just on the Bjork interview, and we can all talk about what we know about Bjork being into Stockhausen, or how, areas where we see her music influenced by him, and sharing posts about that and videos and stuff. Or I might, I'm going to have to do a post about this cosmic opera because I just need you guys to take a few minutes out of your day and watch this weirdness.
She's really into cosmic opera.
It is, I think, probably because of my theater background and also my love of early electronic music and theatricalism and Sun Ra, and I just felt like that was everything I love wrapped up in one. And I also wasn't expecting to find that. I didn't know he did it, so it kind of blew me away, and I'm going to be obsessed with that now for a while.
Very cool.
So So, like I said, we're kicking off the week with this conversation to talk about Stockhausen. But then throughout the week, we'll be posting prompts to get you more into the nitty-gritty specifics that excited us. And we also want you to share anything that you find or that you already know. There's a couple people in the group that have already brought him up a few times. So I have a feeling there's some, Stockhausen experts in the group, and we'd love to hear from you to help us sort of like be our mentors as well to the group this week as we talk more about him. Because we could do like a whole month on Stockhausen. That would be very easy to do. There's just there's so much to cover. And the ways that it crosses over with he was in San Francisco in the 60s. He went to, Pierre Schaeffer's studio and learned from him. And he spent time with Zinoviev and they developed, the Quag and all these things. And, who else was he talking to?
He was sort of
all the threads and how they all
Forrest
connect.
Gump
It's very
of
cosmic.
Experimental sound.
Not everyone can be Forrest Gump.
It's true.
They all
I feel like that reference is not well received anymore anyway.
What did he get influenced by when he was in Japan?
Positive, and now
I have so many
I hate that movie.
Yeah, it's not great.
For good reason. But
so we want to know what you know about him. We're gonna be, posting what excites us, and what we learn. And we'll see how deep we can get it, and then how many threads we can tie together from what we've learned about the other people we've been talking about. So
what?
I have so much I'm writing down and links I'm grabbing right now.
So, in your opinion, what's the best era of Stockhausen compositions?
Oh, that's too hard to say. He made 300 compositions from 1951 until 2007.
I know. What's your favorite era?
Look, I really dig his 70s lecture era. He's got the long hair. He's very confident. He's done the Kontakte already. So he's kind of established himself.
He's speaking from this place of...
That he's all right, I've done this. I've established myself as a leader in this realm. The Beatles love me. I'm a rock star. I really vibe with that. But I also really love... He did a lot of interviews in his later life, right before he died almost. And a lot of things that he was still working on until he died. That I felt like he was a little more able to talk freely about his work and his life and what he thought his legacy was, and he was a little cheeky, and I found him really entertaining. But you can't really talk about him without bringing up the Helicopter Quartet, so...
Yeah, no, that is amazing, actually. I really enjoyed that little anecdote.
So he wrote this quartet. So he was always pushing boundaries in terms of the kind of how he was making music, right? There's all these theories and ways and languages that he developed that we could go into. If people in the group know more about that, please pick up that baton. But also space, the quadraphonic systems, the octaphonic systems, the where the speakers were placed in the room, how sound was coming at the audience, but then also the spaces. He did a bunch of work that was... You'd walk through this whole, I think it was the Beethoven Hall or something, where there was a bunch of different rooms, and each room had different people playing different instruments, doing different things, but it was all part of the same composition. So as you walked through different concert halls...
Your oral experience changed.
Yeah, but what was so funny is that apparently the musicians hated it so much that they revolted and just played whatever they wanted. And they didn't actually play his piece, and it was a total failure. But I thought that was amazing, that he drove them mad, and they couldn't handle it. And so they ended up just, in the moment on the day of the performance, just playing whatever they wanted.
Right. Oh.
I can't imagine, as the audience member, because you don't know what you're expecting anyway.
I have half a mind,
okay.
though, considering what I've read about him, and that, he was really into this sort of, planned randomness.
Mm-hmm. That maybe he did that on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that was a compositional technique, where he
drive them mad to get them to improvise.
He knew that they, he created some. He was like, what if I, compose something so ridiculous, and I'm such a jerk about in
I don't
demanding.
think he couldn't help but be demanding and intense.
I know, he would say things like, in the interviews that we've seen, at least the video stuff, like somebody would play something a certain way and he'd be like, I really like what you did there. That's not
and it
in
would
the
make you
piece
feel
at all.
like I felt like if I was that person, I would be like, I could die now.
Yeah.
But when he called you out, you would want to like shrink into.
But it was kind of like his way of being like, he was calling you out, but saying it and
right, like you did something that wasn't in the sheet music and that wasn't what I conducted, but I'm okay with it.
It was just his way of bringing it up. It was like, instead of just being like a total jerk about it, which I'm sure he had the capability of doing.
Yeah, I heard he was like completely too hard to work with.
People thought he was mad, and all that stuff. But like, I just thought that was like a cool way to do it. It's like, what would make you feel worse? Just having to live with the fact that he knows that you added something to the piece, and didn't say anything about it, or would you rather be yelled at? I think I would rather just be like blasted on the spot.
I would want some kind of feedback.
I would rather be blasted than have like this passive aggressive like, hey, I really like what you added to the piece there.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff
honesty.
That's the kind of stuff that would make me like not be able to sleep at night. Like
be worrying what they really thought.
Exactly. Like I'm like, he couldn't have felt that way, about me improvising. No composer enjoys when you add stuff to their piece that they, slaved over.
Oh, but here's an interview from when he was older that was really good. It's not too long. That's a video. And I just have so much cool stuff that I found that I'm not sure where to drop it in. But like I said, I'll be posting it more throughout the week.
I loved that later interview that we saw where a guy was interviewing him, and his first question was, this is what he gets for asking this question right off the bat, but he was like, what is the most interesting, this is kind of why I did this to you, what is the most interesting sound that you've ever heard?
I should have picked up on that.
Or something like that, and he was like, no.
He was like, no, I can't tell you. I can't answer that.
He's like, he was like, could you tell us the most interesting sound you've ever heard or imagined? And he was like, no.
And that was all you were gonna get out of him. Let's see. We can talk a little bit about his upbringing and a little biographical stuff.
Oh, right.
So he was
start off on a great foot.
Born in Germany. I'm going to grab the Wikipedia just so I can get the dates right. But he was born in Germany, and his father was in the Nazi Party, and his mother was mentally ill. So when he was young, his mother was sent to a mental hospital, and when the Nazis took power, they did not think that mentally ill people were deserving of life, and she was sent to the gas chamber, though he was not made aware of this. He was told that everyone at the hospital got some kind of disease and they all died, but later he did know. His father also went off to the Russian front of the war and was never heard from again. He was considered missing in action and then presumed dead. So he lost both of his parents at a young age, but his father did remarry what I heard his housekeeper became his stepmother. And so he was, like many of the people we've discussed from this time, very affected and traumatized by growing up in wartime and from what he experienced in his childhood. And a lot of people say he carried this through his life and never really got over it. And it made him the very strict, black and white thinking kind of person that he was. Though he was very creative and weird and cosmic and thought he was from another planet, his work ethic and his drive, was very, black and white, very strict, very rigid. He was also raised, with religion in a very intense way that he carried with him.
Oh, right. It was said that he thought he was like a god.
He had some issues with
very black and white.
Taking that religion mixed with his trauma and his upbringing.
Well, we didn't talk
very
about
intensely.
Leashed yet.
Well, that was actually the Octophony was part of Leashed, yeah.
But who are the three characters involved with that? Satan. That was the last one. That was the big reveal. But like,
Oh, I'm getting confused now because there's the work where there's an angel character. There's like the angel Michael, but it's actually
Angel
him.
Michael,
It's
right.
his own
But it's
story
his own
played
story,
out through like
the
religious
Angel Michael.
archetypes.
Yeah.
Where you can see like his father and his mother and his life and everything that gets played out. And I believe in the performance of that, his son, who's a trumpeter, actually played him, this angel character. We're gonna have to deep dive into that because that's a whole day's worth of conversation to have. But yeah, so he had a pretty, hard time with losing his parents at a young age, and he began. I'd say the most influential character in his life is Olivier Messiaen, who he studied with in Paris, and. Like we said, he studied composition.
Was that who he was studying with when he met Pierre Schaeffer?
Must have been,
Oh,
yeah.
no, okay.
Because there was also, a lot of the characters that were in Paris at the time that he was interacting with. But he had a very traditional, musical training, because what else was there at the time? But he did go to university and did study composition and linguistics and...
I think that's an interesting pairing.
Yeah.
Linguistics.
Well, he wanted to be a writer, so that's in the mix too.
And music, but that's a pretty rare one. You hear a lot of mathematics and music, and it's been said that they go hand in hand. But the linguistics aspect is very interesting.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, he studied music mostly, like a lot of the other people we've talked about. He did go to school and then university for music, and had mentors and teachers that guided him to his more experimental ventures. And then he took his position at the West German Radio Electronic Music Studio. That was newly formed, and eventually became the director of that. He did spend some time traveling the world. A lot of time in London. He went to San Francisco. He was in New York. He was in Japan. He was in Paris. So he is a world traveler for someone who, was orphaned at a young age. It seems like it would have been harder to get around during those times, I guess.
Well, I was going to say that was
boats.
that was close to the advent of commercial flight.
Yeah, pretty early. It amazes me that people were ready to fly commercially. I don't think I would have been.
Seems like going to Mars.
So ready to jump in an airplane that didn't feel super.
Especially.
I have still to this day.
Coming off of a world war.
Yeah, I don't know. It amazes me that people were traveling so much by plane, and it was cool. It was the jet set or whatever. I guess the advertising made it cool.
Flying commercially, knowing that the Vietnam War was
That's
happening.
much later.
I know. I'm just saying, I'm flying during wartime would seem
just in general, yeah.
really risky to me, just considering that, people didn't fly and still don't fly post 9/11.
There's many reasons to be anxious about flying. We're not trying to put that out there to anybody who might already feel that way.
Or to provide any
but nobody's going anywhere right now.
other reasons to be anxious right now at all.
I'm just impressed with his extensive travels and
he got around.
how much he was influenced by that. Oh yeah, Jerry Goldsmith. That's a good reference too. He did the soundtrack to Logan's Run, which is a favorite of ours. Let me read this. Got a lot of influence of Stockhausen's work in the composing the soundtrack.
Talk about
composition,
influences.
though it is made without electronic
of the Galaxy Electric.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people were influenced. That's why I say there's so much to talk about with Stockhausen, because yes, he was working with electronic music in the electronic music studio, like he says, just because that's what was going on at the time of his ascension and his work. But he was more into the ideas about composition and breaking the structures of traditional Western classical music, and how music was thought of, how it was produced, how it was made, how it was written, he was trying to come up with, he did, like we said, a lot of pre-composition, so he was coming up with ways to write music out, and it was more about those ideas than it really was about what the music was going to be and how it would make you feel. A lot of people say his music is not very emotional, but I think he was a pretty emotional person.
Which I had noticed, that was something I had mentioned about Daphne Oram, for example. All of her compositions that are recorded sound like experiments that she thought of ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And, she was basically just doing that sound experiment.
Right.
That was ended up being, one of her compositions.
This song is really just her.
And I feel like
with this
Stockhausen kind of did that from a written compositional standpoint. Mm-hmm. Like, he would the piece would be about a concept, like concept pieces, rather than them being about creating a lovely piece of music.
Yeah, and he says too, like, as he went through his life, he built on those ideas. And that's why he didn't really care about the pop music that he inspired, because he felt like it was repetitive and redundant. Like, he wanted people to continue to push their ideas forward, and each piece should be, developing into another idea. You shouldn't play with the same idea again.
Right. Which is kind of the opposite of pop.
Which I'm not sure that I can really go that... I don't think that that's my calling in life, personally.
Yeah.
To innovate beyond. I just like making pop music to an extent.
If we're talking about ourselves, I think one of the things that we talk about all the time is the fact that, we like to take from these influences of experimental composers and, people that are, sort of forward-thinking in electronic music composition, and we like to take from those influences and ideas and then try to make pop music, from that sort of pool of ideas.
That feels like concepts. It's not really pop music, I guess. Like, it's got enough there, because we like music that has...
Well, it depends on what era of pop music you're speaking
that's
of.
True.
Like, if you're talking about, like, mid-'60s, it would fit right in. If you're talking about now, it's like, oh, we're weird. We're the weird music.
We're not of our time, I guess. We're trying to live in another time. I found this video, and it's a series of videos that I'm sure once you watch the first one, it'll lead you through the rest of the actual WDR studios. So somebody went in there in like 2008 and filmed, what equipment was there.
Which is right around the time he died, right?
It's right after he died, yeah.
Right after he died.
Yes, maybe not in a traditional way, but it definitely introspective music. Yes, I found that to be true. Like, it's moving. He had very deep ideas about consciousness and humanity and what we're all here for, and that music is like the most important healing power that we have. So I don't know how you could have those ideas and be that person and not have your music reflect that emotional power. So I think he just probably came across as very didactic and cold, and so people felt that way about his music because it wasn't fitting into any boxes, and it wasn't about, oh, let's get people to dance or love songs or things like that. But he was making these really moving, powerful operas that people say who saw them that like nothing ever comes close to those experiences.
Wow.
So that's all we've got on Stockhausen for today. I feel like I am just bursting with stuff I want to talk about to you guys this week. And I can't wait to, hear what excites you. Already got a couple interesting bits from Jose here.
Post your favorite Stockhausen piece.
Yeah, or what,
week.
Maybe you've never even heard of Stockhausen.
which is
We don't want
fine.
to presume. That's why we're all in this group.
Totally
This isn't just
fine.
for elitists who already know everything, because we certainly aren't.
No, it's about being part of the journey. Like, we
There's always something new to learn anyway.
barely have scratched the surface on most of the people that we talk about. You know,
Yeah, I feel like
so-
we'll have to like circle back to a few of them.
Yeah, Stockhausen's probably one of them.
But what's been really fun is like as we do a new person, it'll remind me like something I learned about a previous person we've talked about, and like how they may have like a parallel, or maybe they worked together or something like that. So it's been really reinforcing all the stuff that we've been learning. So we're having a lot of fun.
Stay Stockhausen.
You know, stay Stockhausen, stay cosmic, as we like to say. Stay Stockhausen cosmic. He was so cosmic. I'm excited to learn more about his cosmic leanings. Stay creative, and we will talk to you soon.
Ta-ta.